All right. Let's get started. Pass the roll around like usual. So today we're going to talk about animal behavior, which is pretty much just from today's lecture. But this is my last regular session before my super session. I think it's the last regular session at all because tomorrow Hillary's doing a super session, right? So this is the last regular SI session. So it doesn't mean we're only going to talk about animal behavior. If there's stuff that you're confused on from literally anything from the entire semester, now's a good time to ask, or obviously in the next two super sessions. If you guys read the announcements, we're just going to do Dr. Bobek's material. A very slight majority seem to prefer that. So Hillary's going to cover basically exam 1 stuff. I'll cover exam 2 stuff. And then you guys have the responsibility of studying for exam 3 and 4 material yourselves, right? It's not like we're leaving you high and dry, though. We each did a super session on exam 3 and exam 4, making 4 super sessions on that material that are recorded on Panopto. So you can go and watch those. You can watch the Panoptos from class. There are plenty of ways to study for that stuff. The idea was just that there's more conceptually difficult material and a lot more depth to Dr. Bobek's stuff, whereas Dr. Messina's stuff is more just kind of straight memorization. So it's not that one's easier or harder than the other, or that you should study more or less for the other. It's just that we felt we as SI leaders would benefit you more doing exam 1 and 2. If you don't like it, it doesn't matter. We've made our decision. All right, so your biology fact for the day. There's been a new technology developed that can target specific bacteria and leave all other bacteria alone. So they're finding that this could help the antibiotic epidemic, where people are taking antibiotics for things that they shouldn't be taking antibiotics for, or they're not taking all their antibiotics so they don't finish, and then they're left with just those last few strongest bacteria, and they get a worse infection, and then they can't treat it, and all kinds of complications. They're developing drugs that can specifically target those bacteria and kill only them, because the concern would be to kill all your helpful bacteria too. So they can kill specifically the bad bacteria that are sticking around, and this might help solve our problem. So this is new research. I read about it a couple days ago, and I think the article had been posted only a few days before that. So this is, a week or so old. So look for this in the future maybe. Your study tip is to develop a study plan for finals, because I highly doubt this is your only class with a final, right? Anybody in here, this is your only final? Oh, you're a jerk. Most of you, this is one of multiple finals, right? And probably multiple comprehensive finals, no? So you have to have a plan. So for me, for example, I have an organic chemistry final on next Friday, and then a physics final on the Monday after that, and then a biochemistry final 2 days after that, right? So they're all pretty much like 2 days apart. So I can't just study for OChem until the OChem final, and then study for 2 days for physics, and then 2 days for biochem, right? These are comprehensive finals. This is a semester worth of material, and in OChem, it's actually the whole year's worth of material on one test, right? You're not going to be able to pull something like that off, okay? There may be a rare few of you who have like one comprehensive final, and that's fine. But for most of you, you're going to have multiple comprehensive finals, one after another. You're going to need to plan it out, right? So I have planned a balance between, I'll study a few hours for OChem this day, and then maybe a few hours for biochem at the end of the day, and then a few hours for physics, and you got to spread it out and build it up, right? So I'm already studying for my OChem and biochem finals. My physics final's not comprehensive, so that one I don't have to dedicate as much time to. But you have to space it out. I promise you, if you start studying for this final like 2 days before, you're in trouble. But even worse, then you're going to start studying for your other finals late, and they'll all just stack up. So figure out, space out your finals the best you can. Some of them You don't have a choice, right? I can only take my OChem final Friday. I don't have a choice. But my other ones I got to pick, and so I pushed them back a little bit, right? Don't try and take all your finals like on the same day if you don't have to, right? Also, it's university policy that if you have more than 3 finals in a day, if a class adds a 4th, like if all 4 of your finals ended up on the same day and you have to take all 4 the same day, you can defer one of them. I don't know who you have to talk to. It almost never happens. But if it were to happen to you, and you were like, holy crap, I have way too many finals on the same day and I can't move them, you can talk to the university and they're required to let you move that. Just as a tidbit, if that ever happens to you, that you're like, this is impossible, it can be fixed. Anyway, let's get started. So, we've already talked about this like 3 different times. I just wanted to remind you guys of the broken wing display that some birds do, right? Just because if it came up multiple times as an example, it's very question-worthy, test-worthy, right? More important, some vocab that we need to remember. Do you guys remember the difference between proximate and ultimate causation? First off, what's proximate causation? How, right? The kind of right here and now, what's the actual mechanism that's making it happen, right? Maybe the proteins involved or the chemical pathways that are taken, right? What about ultimate? The why, like, so what's the point of using these proteins or chemical pathways? What is it that we're trying to accomplish, right? So with the broken wing display, what would be like a proximate causation? Doesn't have to actually be the real thing. What? Yeah, okay, so how is it doing the broken wing display, right? What's it doing with its wing? What about on sort of a smaller level? What could a scientist look at to explain how the bird does this, or even how it knows to do this?
Like looking at what causes it to do it. Like, is it the sight of a prey or a predator, or if it's the smell, or...
That's getting more into ultimate because it's starting to say, why does the bird do it? Does it see a predator? Does it smell it? Usually proximate will be something more like genetics, right? Does it have a specific gene? Where is that gene? Maybe even what amino acids make up the proteins that execute the genetic order to tell it to do this, right? It's usually like pretty small level stuff. It'll usually be something like genetics or proteins or neural signals, something inside the animal, right? And then we kind of already mentioned the ultimate causation would be, did it see the raccoon that was tied to a dune buggy? Did it smell a raccoon? Did it see a different bird start to do the broken wing, so it thought maybe it should do it too, right? So why does it do it? So I would expect a question that maybe gives you an example and says a proximate cause of the broken wing display or bowerbird building a nest or whatever would be, and it'll give you like a bunch of ultimate causations, and one of them will be proximate, or vice versa. But I would expect some kind of question on proximate versus ultimate. You guys feel pretty comfortable with that? Because this pretty much is the last time we'll talk about it. Anybody struggling with that? Okay, I will take that as a no. Some other examples of interesting animal behavior. There are certain gulls that will, when their eggs have hatched, right, they'll take the broken eggshells and get rid of them, right? It's like they're cleaning up house, right? They take the eggshells out. And they said, well, there's definitely a risk to this, right? They could accidentally eat or damage or kill one of their own babies. What if that wasn't actually a hatched egg? It just looked like it and they accidentally broke it or ate it or something like that, right? So this is a risky behavior. So at first they couldn't figure out. They were like, it doesn't make sense why they get rid of the eggshells. Usually most birds just leave them and they just biodegrade into the ground, right? So they said maybe it lowers the risk of predation because the eggs have a cryptic coloration, right? You guys remember what that means? It blends in with the ground, right? The eggs look like rocks on the outside. So when the eggs haven't hatched yet, they're just chilling there on the ground. They look like rocks. They don't get eaten all that often because the predators don't pay attention to them, right? They don't eat rocks. But when the birds hatch, the inside of the egg is bright white, right? It draws attention. And so if there's a hatched egg next to an unhatched egg, a predator is going to see the unhatched egg, but then he might also he'll see the hatched egg shells all over, but then he might also check out the unhatched egg, right? Much safer to just get rid of the broken bits and protect the ones that still haven't hatched yet, right? And they watched it, and they saw that the amount of predation doubled if you had the shells just 15 centimeters away, or if you took them 200 centimeters away, right? So they found that this is the case. Getting rid of the shells protects the unhatched eggs. Do you have a question?
Oh, I was just going to ask, wasn't it was the unhatched eggs and also that chicks that just hatched?
True. That's also true. If there's like a baby chick still hanging out in the nest, obviously, then a bunch of broken eggs around are going to draw attention, and you've got an exposed baby sitting in the nest. Not the greatest setup. They also found, again, the exception that proves the rule. That's a very common thing in studying behavior, is you find the ones that don't do it, but it still proves the rule. So these ones lived on cliffs, right? And they didn't do it. Why not? Yeah, it's hard to pick eggs off of a cliff, right? Very few animals could get up there and get at the eggs anyway, so they don't care. It makes almost no difference whether or not they get rid of the shells, so they don't. But again, it's the exception proving the rule, right? Do you guys see the reasoning behind that?
And wouldn't, they said the inside of the eggs are extremely white, and so when they hatch, with having that much poop on the hill, it would kind of blend in too?
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, with how they all live right there, it might blend in anyway and not be that big of a deal. It definitely could be. The essential idea is that it doesn't matter whether or not there are eggshells there because no one's really coming by anyway. There's no one to hide things from. But it definitely could be that they still blend in. Yeah. Other questions? Great. Some other interesting examples, and again, I know that these aren't the hardest things in the world to understand, so if you're like, oh my gosh, why are we talking about this again? It's just me reminding you this is an example from class that makes it fair game to be on a test, right? And again, I won't even cover all of the examples, but I point out to you guys the most important ones so that you think, okay, this specific example could be on the test, so I've got to understand what's going on, right? So that's my goal. So this example here with these lovebirds was to show the genetic basis of the behaviors, right? With those seagulls, we were looking at the ultimate causation, right? The idea was hide the eggshells from predators, right? But there's also a genetic basis to these things. So they looked at two closely related lovebirds, fishers and peach-faced, even though to me they're both peach-faced, but the fisher's bird takes long strips of paper or whatever it wants to build its nest out of, right? And it just carries it in its beak and builds its nest wherever it wants to build it, right? The peach-faced lovebird takes shorter strips and tucks it under its feathers and then flies away with them, right? Neither one is necessarily better or worse than the other, right? They both build nests, they both mate and have babies, and their babies do just fine in the nest. It doesn't matter. There's not really it's safer to do it this way or that, There's nothing to it besides genetics. It's built into their genome to take short or long strips and to tuck it or not tuck it, right? But how did they know that? How did they figure that? Oh, I guess I didn't include that slide. The slide that should have been after this slide was the hybrid. Do you guys remember that? They bred a fisher's lovebird and a peach-faced lovebird, and they got a mixed lovebird. Do you guys remember what it did? One of them was that it would go to tuck, but then it wouldn't, right? Like it looked like it wanted to do the tucking behavior, and it just kind of like turned sideways, but then never actually tucked it. What else?
It was intermediate strands.
Yeah, it didn't do long strands or short strands. It did in between, because it was a mix of both. So it didn't pick a short one or a long one. Its genes were half and half, so it did half long, half short, basically, intermediate, right? And it had half of the tucking behavior and half of the regular carrying behavior. So again, the genetic basis for these birds is what does it. Yeah?
Did it try to put it on its feathers, but then end up taking it away?
I don't think so. My understanding was it did the behavior of going to tuck, but never actually tucked. I don't think it's so much that it failed to do it. It just kind of like subconsciously started to tuck and then changed its mind, if I remember right. That also probably wouldn't be like a specific test question. The idea is it did half of the behavior as a mix between each parent, right? So it used intermediate length strips and did sort of tucked, but not really. Make sense? Does that work? Okay. Sometimes it can boil down to a single gene, right? So meadow voles don't do pair bonds, right? They mate with whomever they choose, and they'll have dozens of mates. I don't know if it's like per mating season or what, but they're polygamous, right? They do whatever they want. Prairie voles are more or less monogamous, right? They have a single mate and they bond with that mate, and they spend at least a whole season with that mate, right? Essentially, it's all vasopressin, okay? So they could take a vasopressin receptor gene from the prairie voles that were monogamous and put it into a meadow vole and get it to pair bond, like the prairie voles. And all it took was a single vasopressin receptor in their genome, right? Or you could block it and do the opposite, right? And you could get the prairie voles to pair bond less frequently. And it's all just that one vasopressin receptor. Add it, and the polygamous one becomes monogamous. Take it away, the monogamous one becomes polygamous, right? So again, just one gene difference. These are, and again, it's all just know the example and know the logic behind it. So know the two prairie voles, one's polygamous, one's monogamous, but that you can change vasopressin receptors and get them to switch back and forth.
So they both have vasopressin receptors, but they're just different between them?
No, so the meadow voles that are polygamous don't have a vasopressin receptor. But if you artificially implant one in the meadow vole, it will act like a prairie vole. Or in the prairie vole that has a vasopressin receptor, you can turn it off and get it to act like a meadow vole. So one of them has it, one of them doesn't. Adding or taking away switches each one respectively. Other questions? Does that make sense? Okay. Then there's something called a proximate cue in behavior. Do you guys remember what that is?
The nest. The finding the nest.
For this bee wolf, yeah, exactly. It's how it found the nest. But in general, what would a proximate cue be?
It's kind of knowing, like, the place you're going, like the surroundings around it, and not actually knowing the specific location of that place.
Kind of. So, but in general, if you were to just apply a proximate cue to any animal, doesn't have to be a bee, doesn't have to be a human, but just a proximate cue, yeah.
Would it be certain habits that they have that are genetically or non-genetically affected?
You're on the right track, yeah. So it's a specific behavior, but it's the specific reason for that behavior, right? It's proximate meaning like immediate, right? You can look and you can say, this is what the animal is doing and why. right? So in this bee wolf, right, it was able to build a nest, fly away, really far away, and come back with a bee to feed its larva and get right to its exact nest, even though it looks like every other single nest out there, right? And so it uses proximate cues, in this case, its surroundings, to find that exact nest, right? So what they would do, they found that the bee wolf would just circle and get a little bit wider every time. And they figure probably what it's doing is mapping out its surrounding, and it's memorizing the area so that then when it comes back, it's familiar, right? It's like your first day on campus when you walked around and you were like, I don't know where anything is, this building's really tall and there's some French fries next to it and I don't know what's going on, right? But the more you walk around campus, the more you get familiar with it, and by the end of your first semester of college, you're walking around like not even looking, right? You're like looking at your phone or talking to somebody, and you just end up where you end up without really having to even think about it because you've memorized where you're going. So it's the same idea here. They were able to experimentally determine that that's really what was going on by they would build a pattern, in this case a circle of pine cones, around the nest, right? And the bee would come and always find the nest based on the circle of pine cones. If they moved the circle of pine cones, the bee would still look for its nest in the circle, even though the nest's not there. It's in a different place, right? So what it memorized in this case was the circle of pine cones. And no matter where its actual nest was, it looked for the circle. And it would get to the circle and then it would be like, what the heck, there's no nest here, but it was always looking for that circle. And they figured it can determine shape because then they put the pine cones into a triangle, put completely different objects like rocks into a circle, and it still went to the circle, right? Because bees aren't quite smart enough to figure the difference between pine cones and rocks, but they could recognize shapes, right? And so this bee was looking for circles. It had memorized my nest is in a circle. So wherever it found a circle, that's where it went, even if the nest wasn't there. Does that make sense? So I don't know who thinks up this stuff. They were like, let's change the shape and see what that does. And people are just messing around with stuff, and eventually they find an answer, right? But it's kind of cool how it works. Questions? Anybody want to be an animal researcher now? Get to mess around with pine cones and bees? An interesting one is with sticklebacks, male sticklebacks specifically. They have what's called a fixed action pattern. What's that? Yes, it's fixed. As long as there's a pattern, they will perform the same action regardless. You guys remember what the pattern is here?
Red on the bottom and light on the top.
A red belly and a light top. It didn't matter what shape it was. It didn't even matter if it was fish-shaped. If it was round, or not round, if it was red on the bottom, they attacked it, right? So they even took and built, I don't know, that's probably not the fake one, that's probably a real one, right? Is that red on the bottom?
Yeah.
That's a real one. So they took a fake one that was exactly like it. I guess I shouldn't do this in red, but it wasn't red on the bottom anymore, right? It was just one color, I think. And they didn't attack it, even though it looked exactly like a male stickleback besides the red, it didn't fight it. But if it looked like a blob and it was slightly red on the bottom, they attacked it, right? The fixed action pattern is, well, I guess the signal stimulus, or releaser in this case, is that it's red. And the fixed action pattern is attack anything that's red. Even if it's a mail truck that drives by, attack it, right? That's just their genetics. That's how they're programmed, and that's how they will respond every time. Make sense? So again, these are just random examples to show you how these things work. But the best way to understand animal behavior is with examples of animal behavior. So I would expect references to examples. Like I've told you a couple times, I remember specifically there was a question about the graph with the mayflies and the mating time depending on how big of an offering they brought them, right? And I don't remember if this one came up, but you will probably get something that says like, you know, the fixed action pattern in male sticklebacks was to attack anything with a red belly, right? Something along those lines. He's going to see if you specifically remember the examples.
So, is it the red being on bottom, or is it just the color combination? Because in class I was wondering if they have red on top and white on bottom, they attack it.
I would imagine it's probably at least it has to be red on the bottom, but he did say that they would like try and attack male trucks, and I'm pretty sure those male trucks are like all red, so it might just be red in general, actually. But I don't know. I don't know if it has to be like white then red or what. But there's definitely red. So if you see a question about sticklebacks and there's red in any of the answers, just click that one. But read it first and make sure it makes sense. Other questions? Okay. The gray-lag goose also has a releaser, right? Again, remember, it's the stimulus or releaser, right? For their case, it's just a spherical object near their nest, right? They just assume anything spherical near their nest is an egg, motherly instinct kicks in, and they drag it into the nest and take care of it, right? They would do it with doorknobs. I'm sure they would do it with probably like golf balls or anything about the size and shape of an egg. Doesn't even have to be the same color, unless I doubt they were using specifically white doorknobs. They'll just take anything that's round and put it in their nest and take care of it. It's just their natural maternal instinct to protect eggs, right? Why would this benefit the animal in any way? It doesn't really want to take care of a doorknob. What if an egg accidentally got bumped out of the nest or rolled away or something? It's a good way to make sure that she gets them back, right? It's like having a really good habit. It's just a good habit to keep track of your eggs.
Well, there's no like drawbacks to getting anything else. Like if it's just a doorknob, like it's not gonna harm her.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't reduce any fitness, but on the off chance that she does actually pick up one of her own eggs that somehow rolled out, then good for her, right? So there's no drawback, and it's just a good habit for this goose to have. And then it increases the odds that it has more babies, right? It's all about fitness. Make sense? Okay. This one was a little bit more complex, I guess we could say, because there's a few things that go into zebra finch singing. It's still a proximate mechanism, right? But there's several. So the first one is melatonin, right? And this is just pretty much all animals have melatonin, and it's how they keep track of days and nights, right? When it starts to get really dark, then you start to release melatonin, right? And when it starts to get light, your melatonin goes down. That's why even if you don't set an alarm, usually you'll wake up an hour or so after sunrise, right? You might just go right back to bed because you're tired, but you kind of wake up, right? And you're like, what is going on? And it's bright outside, and you're like, what? It's the light. Your melatonin has gone down, and you're forced awake by the fact you don't have any more melatonin, right? So this is how zebra finches also keep track of what season it is, right? Is it spring? Is it summer? Is it fall? Based on how much melatonin they're releasing on average, right? So that's how they know when it's time to get ready to sing, right? It's almost mating season. Then they increase their estrogen level, and it primes the system, right? So it maybe, I don't know exactly, but it gets their vocal cords ready, right? And you don't have to know like what exactly is going on, but you have to know melatonin tells them what time of year it is, estrogen gets their voice ready, and then testosterone follows that to start the actual singing behavior, right? Does that make sense? And then the interesting thing was and this is always, again, they have to be able to prove it, so they find an exception and then they see if they can make the exception do it anyway, right? So they were able to put extra testosterone and estrogen into the females to make it match the levels of a male, right? They didn't actually do like a sex change or anything. They just changed hormone levels, and they got the females to sing. They didn't sound exactly the same, and if I remember right, they didn't actually attract other females, but they got them to act like the males, right? And it all just boiled down to having the right hormone levels. Cool beans? Questions? All right. Where animal behavior gets really interesting, and some of you, if you've taken like a psychology class or anything like that, is with learning, right? You can learn behaviors. Not every behavior has to boil down to genetics, right? So far, they've all been due to genetics or hormones or something biochemical like that, right? And everything boils down to biochemistry. But learning is modification of behavior with experience, right? So they may have a certain way of doing things based on their genetics, but then over time they realize there's a better way to do this, right? And it was pointed out it's usually in long-lived animals, right? Because if they're going to live 30, 40, 50 plus years, their environment's probably going to change. It could change fairly drastically within their lifetime. They have to be able to choose to adapt on purpose, right? So they can learn what works best for that environment, right? And they figure out, this is what I need to do to be successful, right? You see it in cities a lot, right? You ever been to, anybody ever been to New York? You ever interact with a pigeon from Utah versus a pigeon from New York? Pigeons from Utah are like crazy skittish, right? They won't let you within like 50 feet of them. Pigeons in New York do not care. You can step on them. They don't care. They're used to hundreds of millions of people a year, right? It's just normal for them. They're also used to scavenging from people in the streets, right? You drop a hot dog or a bagel or whatever, and they'll go and eat it, right? So it's actually better for them not to be afraid of people. What's another one? All I can think of is cities. And every time I think of cities, I think of New York. When you see pigeons like building nests inside of like the subway station and stuff, right? Normally pigeons don't want to hang out around people, and they don't want to hang out underground. But subway stations, A, they're all over the place, and B, they're sheltered from predators and harsh conditions and things like that. So they learned, even though they don't love being underground, it's actually safer in the subway station than like out in the street, right? Do you have a question?
Well, there's another good example would be like crows. At least in California, you see them go and they hang over on the lights, headlights of where signal lights, and they drop the nuts, and then let the cars drive over it, and then they would retrieve it afterwards, be able to get the nuts that's inside the hard-shelled nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Crows are crazy. Crows learned how to use currency to the point that they can actually distinguish different bills, and they can pay for things in the right amount. And they learn, this bucket of seeds costs $1. They will bring you $1. Or if they want 2 buckets, they will bring you $2. It's crazy. Crows are too smart. It kind of weirds me out. I could talk. I've read a couple papers on crow behavior, and I think they're wild. Don't mess with crows, man. They actually they recognize individual humans and can hold grudges. And if you piss off a crow, they'll bother you for days, right? If you took his money and didn't give him seeds, he would attack the researchers that didn't give him what he paid for. And for days, for multiple days, he would come back and find that same researcher and pick on that one, right? It's because they learned, I give you money, you give me seeds. You didn't give me seeds, I'm going to fight you, right? And they learn these behaviors. And all my examples so far have been birds, but humans obviously do it, but almost all animals exhibit some kind of, well, not all animals. Any animal, A, that lives long enough to learn because, the flies can't really learn all that much since they live for like a couple days. It's not really a great learning period. They also obviously have to have the cognitive capacity for learning. But if they meet those two requirements, you can teach almost any animal to do almost anything, right? And then we'll get into the much more interesting concepts of learning. I think we talk about pigs in this class. Pigs can also be taught to use currency to an extent. I don't think they recognize like different bills and things like that. But they learned they could pick up coins and carry them over to a piggy bank, which was a little ironic, and they shaped it like a pig and everything. And they would drop the coin in the piggy bank and get a treat, right? They had to pick up the coin, carry it to the piggy bank, drop it in, they got a treat, right? But pigs don't normally carry things, right? Pigs aren't like dogs. They don't pick stuff up with their mouths very often. So pretty quickly they decided this is too much work, and they would just push it with their nose, because that's what pigs do. That's very natural for them. That's how they find food, like in the dirt and things like that, right? They just push with their nose, and it opens up the dirt or the food or whatever, right? And so instead of picking up the coin and walking it all the way over, that's not a very natural behavior, they just gave up, and they would just push it with their nose, then pick it up and put it in, right? But as long as they still got a treat, they just kept doing it. So we'll look at some other really cool animal behavior things. This for me was my favorite part of Dr. Messina's stuff, just because, I don't know, there's a lot of really funny, weird examples, and also I just didn't really care about Australopithecus afarensis. I'm not going to lie to you guys. That was my least favorite part of Dr. Messina's material, was memorizing a bunch of names and dates. So that part is almost behind you. You still have to know that for the final. So if you made a chart, I would recommend not throwing that away. And I would actually recommend making it a couple more times just to get the memory of it down. I think that's it as far as slides go. We can just leave 13 minutes early if you guys want. You guys have questions, stuff you're worried about, stuff you want to talk about in the super session either tomorrow or on Monday? Is there material that you were having a harder time with?
Do you remember how many points he added to the final last year?
How many points he added, as he curved it? He didn't curve the final. What Dr. Messina and Dr. Bobeck, as far as my understanding is, they'll curve the final grade. So you'll get X points, I don't know, 400, let's say. The whole class will be worth 400 points, right? So if you get 375, you'll probably end up at an A, right? They'll take your 375 and add X points to it. So if they add 10, your 375 becomes a 385, still out of 400. And it's totally up to them. It depends on how the class does. If the class average is sitting at a 75%, they probably just won't add any points at all. If it's a little low, they'll just add however many points will take the class average up to a 75%. So if the class average is 280 out of 400, they'll add 20 points to get you to 300 out of 400, right? But they'll just add 20 points to everybody. So if you're at 400 out of 400, you're still just going to get 420 out of 400, right? Does that make sense? So, but don't count on it. That's what I always try and tell, because every single time people are like, oh, well, I'm sitting at a C- right now, but they're going to curve the grade. And I'm like, yeah, but maybe you'll get a C. It's not going to take you whole letter grades, right? We're talking maybe a minus to just a regular, or maybe a regular to a plus, right? But I wouldn't count on that saving you from the final or anything like that. But yes, they do curve the final grade, if need be. Was there another question?
Yeah. Is there going to be a practice final again?
I don't know. I would guess no. But there was a practice exam 1 and 3, so those are still applicable. I would go do those again. He hasn't said anything about a practice final, right? I'm not misremembering anything. I wouldn't expect one. I don't remember getting one, and he's clearly not a fan of making more than one practice test, so, which is valid. People take the practice final and then it's not exactly the same as the final, and people are like, what the heck? Like, you didn't just give me the same test twice. And of course not. Like, it's not really the point. So he just gets tired of those kinds of complaints. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, so Hillary's super session is tomorrow for exam 1 material. Mine is Monday for exam 2 material. You are in charge of studying for exam 3 and 4 material, and anything after exam 4 is also on the final, right? So anything from Monday through this coming Monday is also on the final. And that's all up to you guys. But again, there's super sessions on pretty much all of that, so shouldn't be super difficult. Okay, if that's all, then get out of here. I will see you guys one last time on Monday. Thanks for coming.